Abuja studios of KAFTAN television. As usual, we will be delving into the intersection of politics, governance, and the state of the nation. Today, I have with me a very special guest in the house. He joins me now to do justice to the issue of democracy and the office of the citizen, particularly in these trying times. The news of coups all over or across a portion of Africa. We'll be taking a look at what some have termed an attack on democracy, the way forward, and what really as a citizen you can do to participate and play your role in governance and politics. I've been joined in the studio now by Professor Udenta. He was the founding National Secretary, Alliance for Democracy. He is the director with the Center for Alternative Policy Perspectives and Strategy, Abuja, Nigeria. Good afternoon and welcome to the program. It's such a pleasure to have you, sir.
It's a pleasure to be with you too.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes.
And before we delve into the the issue at hand, I'd like to be one of those to wish you an early birthday. We know your 60th birthday is coming just around the corner.
Sure.
I wish you a happy birthday, sir.
Thank you
so much.
All
right. I'm sure you're aware of what we've been seeing. Just about a day or two ago, we saw yet another coup in Africa. Talking about Gabon this time around, we had Niger the other day, and it has raised issues of democracy and debates all around. Some people say, there's nothing wrong with it. This is what we need to do to get forward. Others say it's archaic and it can never work. And there's so much discussion going on. I'd like to get your thoughts on what people are terming an attack on democracy. What do you think is really going on?
Well, to unpack some of the issues you've thrown out there for the public to feed on when we ask a relevant question, these coup d'etats, do they constitute anti-democratic eruptions or copycat phenomena? What about anti-democratic eruptions? That means them forces embedded within the system, within the polity, that are bitterly opposed to democratic governance. They want a authoritarian pattern of law and order, something that is illiberal in nature, something that is totalitarian, in character. That makes democracy is abhorrent to them and their mindset. Is that really the case? Or again, is it like copycat, mimicry? Someone has made a coup in Guinea. Somebody in Mali said, oh, it's possible to make a coup in Mali. Somebody in Burkina Faso. We love the coup in Mali, then in Burkina Faso. Somebody in Niger said, Niger can't be left out of this bargain. Let's do another coup in Niger. Or finally, is this assault imposed on democracy a way of drawing attention in a very grim manner to the backsliding of democratic governance and the lack of effort on those who control the polity in implementing the so-called dividends of democracy? This brings us to wider conversations about legitimacy. Remember 2011, the Arab Spring. Almost every country impacted upon by the Arab Spring had constitutions, had democratic in good government, and had parliaments. But if repeated democratic exercises in electoral form for it to produce a system where people are included in politics, in governance, in economy, in culture, where education opportunities are shrinking, where life expectancy is low, where poverty is haunting the land, and where the youth are not employed, that system have lost legitimacy. But the problem now is, if it system loses legitimacy, should that system be called to order via an anti-democratic experiment, via coup d'etat, or through some other populist measure, or through some other empowered civic space agitation that can draw the mind of those who are in charge of the state to do the right thing?
So can we get to know some of those? Because people look at it as this or this. Is either you stay with democracy or you go violent. Okay,
the problem there is that even the term democracy is contentious. Across Africa, what we describe as democracy is Western democracy. Democracy that is of the liberal Western model. So long as you have a constitution prescribing a 4-year or 5-year or 6-year tenure, so long as you have elections organized by electoral committee or electoral body empowered to do so, so long as people contest these elections and then people declare winners and some go to court and then court adjudicates, and then so long as people are sworn in, democracy is in place. That's not exactly what democracy is. That is only in form. The substance of democracy is what do you do with the power you have acquired through these electoral means? How do you impact on the life of the people? How do you improve their living standard? How do you say the human development index is up? How do you say the human infrastructure is built? Education, public health, public works, power supply, whatever you can mention. If you don't have any of this in place, and they are not like incidental problems, but regular embedded problems within the system from 1999 to date. That's 24 years. If you can't boast of regular power supply and billions of dollars have been sunk into that sector, that is monumental failure. That's enough to call to question the legitimacy of that state. The problem, therefore, is what do you do when the legitimacy is lost? So I make a distinction between democratic norms and form. It is good to have one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote, or one person, one vote. It's good to count these elections fairly. It's good to have the leaders declared, under a free, credible, transparent format of electoral procedure. That is one step. It's a form. The content is what do you do with it. If in Mali people feel over time the government is not doing what they ought to do, how do you hold the government responsible and accountable? You can do so through populist pressure, through agitations, petitions, protests, and so on. You can do that through some measure of intervention by the National Assembly, by the people, compelling them to maybe sit up and do better. It could be through recall or referendum, whatever the case may be, within that set of democratic, procedures. But some people begin to lose hope. Every election doesn't produce a better outcome. Rather, there is a growing angst, a growing sense of despondency and disillusionment. So the military, not fit to govern, we all should admit it. I was a victim of military dictatorship. I suffered detention systems under Jansani Abacha, agitating for the return of democracy. And as we read out, there was a founding secretary for Alliance for Democracy, one of the three parties constitutionally recommended to wipe the 1999 transition. That means I have my own fake contribution to building democracy in Nigeria. But 24 years later, if I look back, well, I say that the struggle of heroes like us, who suffered some death, some suffered exile, this sense of suffering, sense of angst, sense of pain, are justified by the way and where Nigeria is today. I'm not giving up on democracy in quote, but at the same time, the rulers of the day must understand that the people's patience is running thin. And democracy can be measured by the form or the elements that it is composed of. It must be measured by practical implementation of laudable programs and policies and projects that impact on the life of the people. If you fail to do so, in pre-1999, the military seems to be the order of the day across most swath of territories in Africa. Post-1999 Nigeria, we now have what is called security sector transformation. How do we subordinate the armed forces and the security agencies and security and organizations to democratic control? How do we let the military understand that their place is to maintain law and order outside in terms of territorial destruction of the country, and the police internal order? How do we expect them to be responsible and responsive to democratic governance? They've done so remarkably well as part of what has gone on in the country. Some other countries may not have a very strong and robust platform for this subordination of the military to democratic control. So the moment the democracy is not functioning the way it's not functioning, the military could feel a sense of entitlement to strike. And when they strike and the people pour out into the street, it seems as if they're celebrating the return of military despotism and then agitating against democratic rule that lost its way. So the only solution will be, what are the reasons why democracy is sliding? What are the reasons why the people are discontented? What are the reasons why the military may even have the urge or the appetite to strike? You can break them down into simple things. Political inclusion, which means you include as many people as possible in the political process, not just in terms of normative talk or rhetoric, but in terms of practical effort to include them. When you charge 100 million to contest for presidency, 50 million for governorship, and these parties alone will win. And those who go for small parties, maybe pay small money, will never have any sense of entitlement to winning an election. They have been excluded. When you're not getting there, and rather than devoting your time and energy working for the people and toiling for them, most of the political leaders end up fattening their own pockets to the misery of the wider sections of society. When you see that the education is simply backsliding, that health is backsliding, security is backsliding, human capital is backsliding, human security is backsliding, what then do you have to hold on to say democracy is working? It's not working because there's a parliament and a constitution. You provide opportunity for the military to strike. To shut down the space for military intervention in politics is to empower the people and enable the democratic environment through practical policies and programs.
All right, that's fair enough. The way you broke it down really makes a whole lot of sense. But you spoke about the reasons these might be happening. But let's talk about citizens now. People like to put it side by side. Citizens in countries like where military rule is already enforced, they say, you've even already described it, the sacrifices you had to make while under military rule. It's not as easy to air your discontent or your protest. You know, you could lose your life just for doing that.
Absolutely.
Yes. So the issue now is, I don't know if you can help us out. In those kinds of society, is there no more hope of return to democracy? And then for us here, how do you think we should maximize the power of the citizen? It used to be said that the office of the citizen, when used properly, is the highest in the land, or has the most power, because when we come together, there's no government that is as numerically as much as the people. So how should people start to use that power that they have as citizens in both climes? The climes where it's a military rule and the climes where we still have some semblance of democracy.
Okay, now the way you look at it is a very simple way. For citizens in countries where there's democratic backsliding, maybe Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, if that one endures, and potentially Gabon. What they're celebrating is not a return to civil, not a return to military despotic governance. They're celebrating the exit of an awful, to be forgotten, or to be damned caricature of democracy in the mood of maybe civilian dictatorship. They don't want the military to be part of their governance space for a very long time. But they're very elated that the sign and symbol, or the picture and image of the failure, of anger, of pain, is gone. So that's why the military, when they come to power in such countries, do not plan to stay for too long. It's almost like a roulette, a game of chess. 1 year, 2 years, short transition. They groom another set of political leaders. Those who come in there, they didn't learn the harsh lesson of the fate of the previous president or previous government. And they continue for another 4, 5, 6, 7 years again. And the tension builds and contradictions multiply. And the people's anger begins to now boil out of control. And the military steps in again. So it's a never-ending cycle. So I want to distinguish between the anger of the people against the so-called democratic rule that will make them welcome, in quote, military adventure in power. Again, the theory of the military to stay in a very short form, short term, and then return power, in quote, back again to democracy. This repetitive pattern of absurd history must come to an end in Africa. That means even if in countries where there's authoritarian military, despotism in place, and democracy returns, you have to return again through what you suggested, an empowered civic space to say, okay, this past government, the civilian government, not the democratic government, but the civilian government. Nothing democratic about it, not in terms of governance model, not in terms of the way it operated, not in terms of the empowerment of the people. But now that it's gone, we don't want you to repeat the same mistakes. That means we hold you accountable and hold you responsible for a quick, short, sharp return back to democracy. And this time, we're going to make sure that the citizens must be resolute and must be empowered enough to ensure that the new set of democratic leaders or civilian leaders do not behave as the old. In countries like Nigeria, where we still have sustainable democracy being sustained or civil rule being sustained, I have a thesis which I derive, partially from Chinua Achebe, the well-known novelist and humanist, in Hour of God, where he talked about Ezulu, the chief priest of Ulu of El Maro, telling his friend, if a disease visits a community, you look for an animal whose blood matches the potency of the disease. That's why when you do ritual ceremonies, you use a fowl. That's a chicken. If it's strong, you use that of a ram. If it's big, you use a bull. Sometimes in ancient past, they even use human. So it's some with a system in terms of maladies requiring therapeutics. How do you solve this malady? Where would the people come in this intersection of politics, power, and governance? Through power representation. The first arm of government is the legislature. People don't seem to understand. And the most important, second one is the executive. You have to make a law to execute the law before the court will then interpret the law. Hold the people you elected accountable. Don't see them as overlord. They are the servants of the people. But in Nigeria, the table is turned. Senators, members of the House of Reps, even councillors at the village level become overlord. And the people queue up to even welcome and embrace them and look at them with awe. That is where they take advantage of them. But when you hold them accountable, everything seems to happen in Abuja. That shouldn't happen here. If you have a senator, hold him or she accountable at the village level. You have the constituency office. If he doesn't have one, compel him to open one and give account to what he does in terms of representation, in terms of lawmaking, in terms of oversight, and possibly attracting the so-called constituency projects. So when you hold there's 109 or so senators, 360 reps, 7 and something, members of the local legislature at the local level, thousands of councillors, and hold them accountable for every penny that is appropriated. That is one way of advancing the cause of democracy and improvement of the life of the people. Broadly speaking, therefore, when it comes to the executive branch, because the president is only here in Abuja with his team of ministers, you use the civil society and the spaces they can empower themselves with, use the media, and then use other instruments of pressure, nationality groups, to let the labor, particularly too, organized labor, the NLC, the TUC, and the rest of the civil society conclave. And there is a very strong partnership between the two. We hold the government accountable. You remove fuel subsidy. Why did you remove fuel subsidy? That's okay, fine in principle. What do you have in terms of countermeasures to cushion the impact? You didn't seem to have this in thought out clearly at all. We help you think it out. If you don't think it out, then we'll hold you accountable. We're going to threaten a strike or protest. That is one way of holding government accountable. And there's some reaction from the government. Palliatives, some sort of stabilization fund given to states, and all manners of things. I don't know whether they will work very well, but at least it is drawing attention of government to what the people are agitating for. That's one way of sustaining democratic governance and transforming, liberal civil governance into proper democratic ethos.
All right, that's fair enough. Those are workable solutions that I believe people can begin to start doing at home. You don't need any special training to hold anyone accountable, because they are there to suit your needs, so to speak. All right, so let's move. I want to really get your thoughts now on the last election cycle. You mentioned, you referenced how it seems as though things are deteriorating instead of going the other way. Yeah. When the Electoral Act, when there was agitations for it and so on, there was a lot of excitement that this thing is going to
revolutionize. Get it right this time around. The technical issues have been taken care of. It seems like
a very great solution. So the question I'd like to ask now is, how do we, go forward, knowing that we got something that we thought was going to, really fix things? If it doesn't work, what do you think needs to be done now? Is it an amendment? Is it something else, really? Because it seems as though even if we have it on ground, there's still a level of implementation.
Okay, the problem there is this, and I'm struggling to make this point as loudly and as clearly as possible. Elections should begin and end when voters count their votes, and votes are properly counted, and the results fairly, transparently, credibly, and justly declared. That brings closure to elections in virtually all cases around the world. When there are disputations, those disputations occur within the context of the electoral process. That means you hold the elections. While the results are being counted, there are court challenges. People go to court to challenge certain aspects of the election, either to keep the vote going on in some areas because of late arrival of materials and so on, or thunderstorm or wind blows, whatever it is. Then when you finish, before election results are certified, then people equally make their voice heard, either through the courts or through protest. But when results are announced, it brings closure. In Nigeria, announcing results never brings closure. It opens up new portal of agitation and contestation via the courts, the tribunal. That means Nigerian elections are not settled. In a sense, the last elections are not settled yet. Almost everything is up for grabs. Virtually all the governorship elections are being contested bitterly. All the Senate elections are being contested, or the reps elections. Some are even changing hands. Some tribunals are toppling senators, reps, and so on. The presidential election is hotly being contested. And it will continue to the Supreme Court. That makes it almost impossible for an analyst like me to begin now to now pontificate or ventilate about the nature of the last electoral act, whether it worked very well or it didn't work very well. An example, if the tribunal decides that the election went very well, and the Supreme Court somewhere down the line sustains that it went very well, apparently a question becomes mute. That means the electoral act did what the magic was expected to do. As when it didn't do that. And the tribunal holds the INEC responsible and accountable in two ways. It could be, we may not overturn this election, but I'm going to castigate INEC as they did, and the court did in 2007. Said, you blundered, you mixed up big time, you made a lot of claims you didn't, see through. They are very important, very fundamental issues, but may not actually lead to toppling the election, but we still need to do a lot more. That could require amendment. It could topple the entire presidential election and say, go for a rerun. That means the entire infrastructure you build the election on is wrong. That is massive overhaul of the Electoral Act. We can't be very certain about some of these outcomes until the tribunal has spoken and the Supreme Court, 2 months down the line, Iwali has spoken. That is where the democratic process in Nigeria has led us to, where elections do not bring closure, where the courts, at the end of the day, became embedded into the electoral process. So the court is no longer distinct from the electoral process. The courts now decide who wins the election and who doesn't win the election.
So what do you think is the way forward? Because during the process to agitations for Electoral Act, it was, I don't want to use the word marketed, it was said to be, this would help us in this manner. Now that we've had the Electoral Act, it seems that those who have to enforce it are still, we still have to look at them. So going forward, do we propose another act? Do we propose a change of mindset? What do we do?
I'm not a lawyer, and at the same time, I'm mindful that some of the issues they are tossing out there may issues be what the tribunal, if they're watching and listening to us, may be saying, oh, come on, these guys are really intruding in our space. I can broadly talk about the elections, talk about the processes, talk about how it was conducted and what happened, but I may be very, it may be concerning for me to dwell into the technical details. I can only give one, example at that technical level. If there's any form of ambiguity, and sometimes these ambiguities are deliberately inserted to create commotion down the line, sometimes innocent ambiguities, which means not intended. 2 examples of these ambiguities may well be FCT and 25%. And you don't know what it is. But it's ambiguous. That means at the end of the day, when the Supreme Court must have weighed on that particular matter, there could be an amendment to the Constitution, on that particular area, or the Electoral Act specifying is it and or, and so on, to be very clear. The issue again of transmission of this result again is another area of ambiguity. If you give impression that there could be other formats of doing certain things, including this specific format, then it gives somebody, maybe some mischievous opportunity to intervene in a lex glorious way and fashion and manner that is very anti-democratic and unprogressive. But if you tighten the screws on such provisions, there may not be any wiggle room for anybody to say, I can do this way or do it that way. So ambiguities may rather be implanted there as innocent decisions by those who frame the law or textualize it. Ambiguities may only be deliberate insertions in order to confuse people and then manipulate the system. That is how as much specific I can go, given the circumstances of the time, and the tribunal may weigh with their decision anytime soon.
Right, that's fair enough. Another thing people say is that Nigeria is just about 60 years, and that we shouldn't be comparing our democracy with advanced democracies. Do you think it's a matter of time that if we continue on the path, especially with what the things you've described, that eventually we'll get to that level?
I don't know. In the past, I used to have that kind of mindset I talked about when Bill Clinton came 2001 or thereabout. He was about leaving as the president, or was he a former president then already, to address the joint session of the National Assembly. And he talked about the grave implications of democracy. That is not easy. It's a difficult thing you guys have gotten yourselves involved with. So it takes time, it takes painful effort, it takes perseverance, patience to work. And sometimes you lose 4 steps when you take only 1 step. But if you stay at it, you will move forward. And I have another analogy of having a Volkswagen engine, this Volkswagen Beetle, and then dressing in Ferrari body like a Formula 1 and say, go win a Formula 1 race. The body is Formula 1, Ferrari. Say, why is not doing very well, sluggish, but the engine is a Beetle engine. That's the kind of democracy you have here. But at the same time now, I look back and said, okay, look at technology. If you look at inventions, electricity, telephone, telegram and all manners of stuff, some will take like 20, 25, 40 years for the transition from one to the other. But then look at in the past 30 years with the invention of the internet, some changes occur within 1 second. And I mean literally 1 second, not even 1 minute, to AI now and robotics and Internet of Things. So it's with the speed of light, even subsonic speed, that things are transforming. And knowledge is transforming with information. So if it took America and other countries 200 odd years to come to where they are, Nigeria needs 200 years to come to where they are. No. If you took them 200 years, it may take you 10 years because of advantage of technology, information at their disposal, and a whole lot of inventions that are occurring before our eyes. That's not a luxury for you to say, we need all the time in the world, we can get it right. Surely should get it right now. And when the signs are there, they're not getting it right. We shouldn't praise those dangerous, terrible signs to say, oh, they will come and go. Tomorrow will be better than, today. And finally, look at the ancient wisdom, find in epistemology in most Nigerian societies, African societies, in the form of a proverb. In Igbo, say, you take your eyes and know the corn and cob that is going to be ripe or is already ripened. So you don't need to just go and touch it or pinch it to know that it's ripe. A democratic process that is going to produce good result, we know by watching and seeing it. That which if you give it 200 years will not achieve anything, we know for sure. This our system is in dire need of overhaul, in dire need of some reconceptualization, some redesign at the level of facts, articulation of what the ontological foundations of the Nigerian state are. And then
who can begin to do this?
What you say the power of the citizens or the government of the citizens, that's where you have to begin at that level too. Citizens conversation, doing media, these kind of media interventions, by use of public intellectuals like us, strategists and thinkers, and then the broad mass of the people, aligning to this new idea that something has to change, has to give way. Then it's only when you have that you can begin to pressure and comment that most of the time, I don't know whether they're indolent or whether they're full of bright ideas and vision, to transform society. But if you don't even know who you are as a people, you don't know what the system is composed of, you don't even know the nature of democracy you're piloting, apparently, things will never be gotten right. Look at, Nigerian scholars and intellectuals. You seem to have closed their eyes and settled for what is going on. One aspect of democracy is contestation. In Nigeria, it becomes hyper contestation. Billions are spent litigating because winner takes all. First, pass the ghost, but pass the post. Some countries like China talk about a model of cooperation and collaboration. So rather than wasting billions and trillions in contestation, we pull our energies as the people to get from different segments of society, different publics, that can marshal our resources to advance ourselves, towards some new order. Obasanjo, former President Obasanjo in 1989, wrote a book, Constitution for National Development and Integration, which, at one point, my intellectual mentor and ideological guide, fought bitterly against and we supported him. He thought about the one-party state. If you had opportunity in 79, you wouldn't have reached that five political party, it would have been one party. But African cultural, environment, our civilizational model negates this power, this contestation. It's like collaboration from the elders to the women to the youth and so on, like in the village assembly, talking until reach a consensus. You have led way for a consensual kind of political arrangement, rather than a bitter partisan arrangement. Today we're deepened bitterness at the partisanship level, at the partisan level, to the degree now that we cannot even, govern the country properly because of the partisan gridlock. People are hold into where they are, bitterly opposed to one another, and not prepared to yield space.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if is that a will I call it an agreement, or which do you think President Obasanjo had the right idea?
I don't know. I would say that sometimes you have to put this into practice. The point I'm making is that when you embrace Western democracy or democratic model, liberal democracy or democracy, you universalize a particular phenomenon. So the movement from particularity of the Western model to its universality, to say it is not like a particular Western phenomenon, it's not universal democracy, seduces into thinking, oh, this is the only model of democracy. I'm saying there are other models of democracy. But if you're not careful to go beneath bias and propaganda, but anything that is not Western democracy, if it is Russian democracy, it's autocratic governance by Putin. If it is China, it is Xi Jinping, it's autocratic, it's not democratic. Who defines democracy? It's by the people where you practice democracy in their space. So we must begin to push back, and have to begin at the level of intellect, intellectuals and scholars and thinkers pushing back. But when they become indolent and yield space or abdicate the obligation, then a primitive political class will now shape the direction or the trajectory of the Nigerian political system. And that will not work well for the people.
That's fair enough. You answered the question I was about to ask about Western influence. So let's end on this. I'd just like to get your thoughts now. I can't have you and not ask you. The new ministers, they've been sworn in, and they are meant to carry out the will or the ideology of the president. I'd just like to get your thoughts about the process, leading up to them coming and what you expect.
My conversation has been a general conversation about democracy and its nature and norms and practices. And as I said earlier, the courts seem to be integral part of our democratic system now. Not democratic system, electoral process, electoral system. So until the Supreme Court rules November, we have a president, no doubt. We have ministers in place. But on the Supreme Court rules, everything is still contingent. So any scholar or intellectual what he sought will be very hesitant, to embrace and address in depth the kind of issue you raised. But I'm not stupid enough to know that ministers are already on ground and their actions are impacting on my life, and so I need to weigh in. But I'm careful in weighing in. When that weigh in, we be dealing with situations that may be ephemeral, contingent, and may be depthless. It may be less than contingent. It may be full of depth. It may not be ephemeral. That means Supreme Court will validate the election result and the minister will stay on ground. Or the Supreme Court may do otherwise, and therefore this conversation is up in the air.
All right, that's fair enough, Professor Udenta. It's been a pleasure having you. And I will take you up on it. Whenever the Supreme Court decides, perhaps we'll come back and start to revisit the specific issues. Thank you so much for coming.
It's a pleasure.
All right, that's all we'll take on this segment of the program. We'll go on a short break. When we return, we'll be delving into the issue of agriculture and also the issue of human trafficking, particularly along the Cameroon border. Stay with us. We'll be right back.